The night Simone turned 38. Her husband stood at the front of a room full of people and handed her a lie wrapped in velvet. It was a Saturday in late October, the kind of evening in Vancouver that smells like wet cedar and chimney smoke, and the private dining room at Oaken and Shaw had been decorated with cream roses and candles that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Dominic had planned everything. That was what he kept telling people. I planned everything. He said it to the sommelier when they arrived. He said it to Simone's mother when she walked in looking uncertain. He said it to the small crowd of 40-something colleagues and family members who filled the room with the sound of good shoes on hardwood floors. Simone Ardell Nakamura, 38 years old, co-founder and silent executive chair of Norlin Collective, one of the most respected sustainable architecture and design firms in Western Canada, stood near the window and watched her husband work the room. She watched how he tilted his glass when he laughed, how he touched the shoulder of every man he spoke to and looked over their heads at the door whenever a woman walked in. She had been watching him for 3 years. Not the watching of someone in love. The watching of someone who has already decided and is only waiting for the right moment. She had the documents, the investigator's report, time-stamped and bound, the hotel receipts, flagged in yellow. The messages Dominic had sent, not to her, never to her, that had been forwarded by someone who knew enough and cared enough to forward them. She had a meeting scheduled with her lawyer for Monday morning. She had a plan. What she had not planned for was tonight, and the velvet box, and what came out of it. Dominic tapped his glass and the room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when they've been drinking long enough to be agreeable. He smiled the smile Simone had once called beautiful, in a journal she no longer kept. 12 years, he said. 12 years of building a life together, and I wanted tonight to be the night I showed everyone in this room, and you, Simone, how much that means to me. He opened the box. Inside, on a fold of dark satin, was a necklace. Gold chain, pendant shaped like a brushstroke, set with what appeared to be a pale green stone. The room made the sound rooms make. A collective breath, a few soft exclamations. Simone's mother pressed her hand to her sternum. Simone looked at the necklace for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at her husband. It's from Aldrin, Dominic said, still smiling. The new collection, limited run. I had it reserved months ago. Simone had founded Aldrin Design Studio 14 years ago, under a holding company her lawyers had structured with 3 layers of separation from her public name. It had been a deliberate choice, made for reasons that had nothing to do with Dominic and everything to do with her own need to build something that could not be taken from her by proximity to anyone else. Aldrin produced objects, jewelry, ceramic vessels, small architectural installations that sat at the intersection of indigenous craft traditions and contemporary minimalism. It had won awards in Milan and Seoul. Its waiting list ran 8 months. It donated 12% of annual revenue to land stewardship programs across British Columbia. Dominic did not know any of this. Dominic knew Aldrin the way his father knew Aldrin, the way men like them knew things like that, which was to say by reputation, and by the price tag, and by the particular pleasure of being seen to give expensive things. What Dominic did not know, what no one in that room knew except Simone, was that the pale green stone in that necklace was not what it appeared to be. She had seen the design as soon as the box opened. Brushstroke pendant, oval stone, gold setting. She knew every piece in the Aldrin archive by heart, the way founders do, and this piece, this specific pendant, was not from any collection Aldrin had produced. It was a reproduction, a very good one, she would grant him that. The chain weight was close, the proportion was correct, but the setting had a small flaw at the clasp, a seam that Aldrin's silversmiths would never allow, and the stone had a uniformity of color that natural labradorite did not possess. Thank you, Simone said. Her voice was steady in the way that still water is steady, because nothing is moving underneath it at all. She held the box without putting the necklace on. Dominic's smile flickered, the way a light flickers when the connection is loose. You're not going to put it on? I'd like to have it appraised first, Simone said. The room went a different kind of quiet, the kind that has an edge. Dominic laughed. It was not a good laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has been caught off guard and is performing confidence to cover it. Appraised, Simone. It's a gift. I know, she said, and I appreciate it. I'd still like to have it appraised. He laughed again, shorter this time, and looked around the room as though inviting the guests to join him in finding her unreasonable. A few people looked at their glasses. Her mother looked at her. We can talk about this later, Dominic said, in the voice he used when he wanted her to understand that the conversation was over. Of course, Simone said. She set the box on the table beside her wine glass and picked up her wine. She had married Dominic Ferris at 31, at a vineyard in the Okanagan on a day when the hills were the color of wheat, and the ceremony ran 8 minutes over schedule because the officiant had printed the wrong version of the vows. Simone had thought at the time that it was funny. That had been one of the things she loved about herself in those years. She could find the funny in things. She had met him through a mutual contact at an urban planning conference in Calgary. He was 34, lead project manager at a mid-sized development consultancy, confident in the way that men who have never been seriously challenged are confident. He was handsome in a reliable way. He told good stories and knew how to order wine and called his mother every Sunday. She had introduced him to her friends, and they had liked him, which had felt like confirmation. What she had not understood then, and would spend the next several years slowly understanding, was that Dominic's confidence was not the kind that makes room for someone else's. It was the kind that requires comparison. He needed to be doing well, but more specifically, he needed to be doing better. Better than his colleagues, better than his friends, and, once they were married, once the initial year of careful performance had passed, better than his wife. When Simone's consulting work began to attract significant recognition, Dominic found reasons to minimize it. When she traveled for projects, he mentioned the travel in a tone that implied inconvenience rather than accomplishment. When she was invited to sit on the board of a national design council, he told the story to his friends as though it were an interesting anecdote about someone they didn't know well. She had not talked about Aldrin with him at all, not because she was hiding it, or not only because she was hiding it, but because she had built Aldrin in the months after her first serious miscarriage when she was 32 and had needed something to put her hands into. It had started as a side project, something quiet and deliberate, and then it had grown the way quiet, deliberate things sometimes grow, slowly and then suddenly into something that mattered. By the time she understood what Dominic was, Aldrin had become too important to risk exposing to him, so she kept it separate, and the separation became, over time, something that felt less like secrecy and more like self-preservation. The investigator's name was someone her lawyer had recommended, a woman named Alexa, who worked out of a low-profile office near to Chinatown and delivered her reports without commentary or inflection. Simone had retained her services 8 months ago. After the third time, she found an inconsistency she could not explain. A receipt for a restaurant she had not been to, a hotel point statement with a stay she had no memory of, a contact saved in Dominic's phone under a name that didn't match the voice she'd heard laughing in the background of a call he'd taken in the garage with the door shut. Alexa's report was 43 pages. It documented 11 months of a relationship Dominic had been conducting with a woman named Priscilla Wen, 31, who worked in business development at a firm Dominic's consultancy had recently partnered with. There were hotel check-ins, there were photographs taken in public spaces, timestamped, there were messages, 3 pages of them, that Dominic had sent in what he apparently believed was privacy. Simone had read the report once on a Tuesday morning in September, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold before she finished. She had not cried. She was not sure what that meant about her, but she noted it. She had called her lawyer on Wednesday. She had called Aldrin's legal counsel on Thursday. She had told no one in her personal life, not even her mother, not even her closest friend, a ceramicist named Joran, who would have driven from North Van in the rain to sit with her. She did not want company. She wanted the documents in order. She wanted Monday morning. What she had not accounted for was Dominic's father. Hector Ferris, 67, retired property developer, was the kind of man who wore his wealth like a suit he'd had since 1994. Slightly out of date but clearly expensive, and he expected you to notice. He sat at the head of the long table at Oaken and Shaw and held court over the dinner with the authority of someone who believes his presence is itself a contribution. His wife, Simone's mother-in-law Janice, sat beside him and laughed at the correct moments and refilled his water glass without being asked, which she had been doing for 41 years. Hector had been talking about Aldrin for most of the year. Simone had tracked this the way you track something that is both ironic and mortifying. The way you might watch someone repeatedly walk past a mirror without recognizing themselves in it. He had first mentioned it at a dinner in January, after seeing a feature in a design magazine. He had cut out the article, which Simone had not known people still did, and brought it to a family dinner to show everyone. By March, he was telling his golf contacts that he had a connection to Aldrin. In August, he had attempted to use Dominic's name to request a private preview of the upcoming collection, and had been politely declined by the studio's client relations manager, who had no idea who he was. Tonight, at dinner, Hector had held court about Aldrin for nearly 20 minutes before the main course arrived. He talked about the craftsmanship. He talked about the design philosophy, paraphrasing things he had read without attributing them. He talked about the Aldrin founder, a visionary, completely anonymous, which is the mark of real confidence, no need for personal celebrity, with a reverence that would have been touching if it were directed at literally anyone who did not already know who that person was. Simone had listened. She had nodded in the correct places. She had accepted a bread roll from the server and torn it apart with her hands beneath the table in a way she hoped no one noticed. Across the table, Dominic caught her eye and gave her a look that meant, "Isn't he something?" in a fond, performative way. The look of a son who has decided that his father's pomposity is charming rather than a mirror. She had looked back at him with an expression she had spent a long time perfecting, the one that registered as pleasant. After dinner, after the cake, after Dominic's sister made a toast that was mostly about herself, the gathering began to thin. People retrieved coats. The servers cleared glasses with the discreet efficiency of people who have seen this kind of evening many times. Dominic's father found Simone near the coat check. "Magnificent gift," Hector said, gesturing in the vague direction of the velvet box, which Simone was holding under her arm. "That piece is going to appreciate, you know. Aldrin pieces hold their value, better than gold in some cases." "I've heard that," Simone said. "The limited run especially." He lowered his voice in the way of someone sharing information they believe is exclusive. "I have a contact at the gallery that carries them here in the city. Not everyone can get access. Dominic asked me to help him track it down." She looked at him. "That's very kind. Anything for family." He straightened his jacket. "This one's from the Threshold collection. Green Labradorite, very rare. The gallery had a waiting list." "Did they?" Simone's. "Months. I pulled some strings." He smiled the smile of someone for whom string pulling is a love language. She thought about telling him then. She considered the logistics of it, the words she would use, the exact look on his face, the way the coat check area would go silent. She thought about the 43 pages of Alexa's report. She thought about Monday morning. "It's a beautiful piece," she said. "I'm going to have it appraised just to be thorough." Hector blinked. "Appraised, she smiled. "I'm careful about jewelry." He laughed the way men like him laugh when something doesn't register as funny. "Well, I'm sure they'll tell you it's worth every penny." "I'm sure they'll tell me something," she said. The appraiser's name was Dennis Vachon, and he had a studio on Granville Island that smelled like mineral oil and precision. Simone had called him on Sunday morning. He was one of 3 independent appraisers in Vancouver she trusted, and she trusted him specifically because he had once told her, quietly, after an appraisal, that an object she had brought him for studio research purposes was extraordinary, and then asked nothing more about where it had come from. She went to his studio Monday morning before her lawyer's appointment. She brought the velvet box. Denny examined the necklace for 11 minutes without speaking. He used 3 different instruments. He held the stone under a loop for a long time, tilted it again. "Where did you get this?" he asked, without looking up. "It was a gift." He set the loop down. "This is a reproduction of an Aldrin piece. The pendant is from the Threshold collection. I've appraised 2 authentic pieces from that line. This is not one of them." He picked it up again, turned it. "The chain is 18 carat, so not entirely without value. The stone is synthetic labradorite. The setting work is competent. But this is not an Aldrin piece. What would an authentic piece from that line be worth?" "The pendant in question." He set it down. "Between $11,000 and $14,000, depending on the stone grade. This piece," he considered. $700, perhaps $850 for the chain alone." Simone looked at the necklace on his work cloth. "Thank you," she said. "Can you put that in writing for me?" He already had his notepad out. She texted Dominic from the car. "Can we meet tonight? I'd like to talk." He replied 20 minutes later. "Everything okay?" she typed. "Of course. Just want to connect before the week gets busy." He replied with a heart emoji. She put her phone face down on the passenger seat. Her lawyer's name was Christelle Okafor, and she had represented Simone's professional interests for 9 years and her personal interests for the last 8 months. She was precise and unhurried in a way that Simone found deeply reassuring, the way a steady boat is reassuring on rough water. They sat across from each other at a long table on the 14th floor of a building on West Georgia, and Christelle went through the property division assessment without drama or unnecessary commentary. "You're protected on Aldrin," Christelle said. "The holding structure means it doesn't enter the marital estate under any reasonable interpretation. Your co-founding interest in Norland Collective is more complex, but manageable. The primary assets in question are the home on Dunbar and the investment accounts held jointly." "I understand. I want to be clear about timing." Christelle looked at her over her reading glasses. "Once you initiate, he will retain counsel, and the window for certain conversations closes. Is there anything you want to address directly before that?" Simone thought about Saturday night, about Hector's pride, about the velvet box. "There is one thing," she said. She invited Dominic to meet her at a restaurant, not at home. She chose a place in Kitsilano where they had eaten in the early years of their marriage, not out of sentiment, but because it had a layout she understood. Open enough that a conversation could not become a scene, quiet enough that a scene, if it happened, would be audible. She arrived first and sat with her back to the wall. He arrived 8 minutes late, which was a pattern. He kissed her cheek. He ordered a beer before he sat down completely. "You look tired," he said. "I've been busy. The Norlin project, among other things." He talked about his week. He talked about a deal his consultancy was circling, a mixed-use development in Burnaby, and she listened and watched his mouth and thought about 43 pages. When he reached a pause, she set her phone on the table between them, screen up. "I had the necklace appraised," she said. Dominic's beer glass paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down. "I see. It's not from Aldrin. It's a reproduction. Competent work, but synthetic stone, non-Aldrin setting. Worth about $700 or $800. The restaurant made its ordinary sounds around them. Somebody at a nearby table was celebrating something. There were laughing voices. Dominic said nothing for a moment. Then, the gallery, wherever it came from. Simone said, "It isn't what you said it was, and your father said he helped you source it, which means someone either misrepresented the piece to both of you, or someone misrepresented it to me." She looked at him steadily. "I'd like to know which." He pressed his thumb against the condensation ring his glass had left on the table. "Simone, I have the appraiser's written assessment," she said. "Dinas Vachon, Granville Island. He's appraised authentic pieces from the Threshold collection before. He was very clear." Dominic looked up. There was something in his face she recognized. Not guilt, exactly, but the pre-guilt expression. The one that happens when someone is still calculating whether they can find a version of events that lets them off the hook. "The gallery said it was authentic," he said finally. "Did you have documentation?" Silence. "A certificate of provenance? Anything in writing from Aldrin?" More silence. "Dominic," he exhaled. "It was your birthday. I wanted it to be." He stopped. "I thought it looked right." She had heard variations of this kind of explanation before, applied to other situations. "I thought it was fine. I thought it didn't matter. I thought you wouldn't notice." "There's something else I want to tell you," Simone said. He looked at her. "I know about Priscilla." The noise of the restaurant continued. Someone's plate was delivered. A server asked a nearby table if everything was all right. Dominic did not move. "I have a report," Simone said. 11 months, beginning last November, hotels, timestamps, messages. She watched him. "I've had it for almost 2 months." He said her name. Just her name. "My lawyer is filing tomorrow morning," she said. "I wanted to tell you myself in person before that happened, because whatever else is true, 12 years is something." She picked up her water glass. "I thought you should hear it from me rather than from a process server." He reached across the table and she leaned back slightly, and the reaching hand stopped. "I need you to understand something," she said. "When you told everyone at my birthday dinner that the necklace was from Aldrin, when your father talked about Aldrin all through dinner, about the craftsmanship and the vision and the founder," she paused. "I founded Aldrin in 2010, under a holding structure privately. I am the Aldrin your father has been talking about for the past year." She gave him a moment. "The piece you gave me wasn't from my own company, but everything your father was so proud to be associated with. That was me, has been me, the whole time." Dominic sat across from her in an Italian restaurant in Kitsilano on a Monday night in October, and she watched him understand. She watched it move through him. The necklace, the dinner, his father's voice, the holding company, 12 years, Priscilla, the lawyer, all of it. She watched it land the way things land when they are too large to land gently. "Simone, the appraiser's report is attached to the filing," she said. "It's relevant to the characterization of certain gifts made during the marriage." She set down her water glass. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours." She picked up her coat from the back of her chair. She put it on the way she always had, right arm first, a small habit she'd had since childhood. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "On Saturday. I know you arranged it." She walked out into the October air, which smelled like wet leaves and the particular saltiness of city streets after rain. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. A cyclist went past with a headlight that cut a clean line through the dark. Down the street, a restaurant she'd been meaning to try. For 2 years had its lights on. She thought about calling Joran. She decided she would call her from the car on the way home, and she would tell her everything, and Joran would probably cry, which was something Simone had not yet allowed herself to do, and maybe that would be enough to start with. She started walking to where she had parked. Her through the restaurant window, she did not look back. That was not a new decision. That was something she had made, quietly and carefully, months ago, in the same way she made all the decisions that mattered, without announcement, without asking permission, on her own.